much for joining us today. As you are aware, IRENA has been examining the gender equity aspect of renewable energy through several publications, but specifically with a dedicated series that is called Renewable Energy, a Gender Perspective. So we are here today to explain and speak a little bit more about the main findings of this second edition of the publication. The first major publication of this specific series that aims to mainstream the gender perspective throughout the renewable energy sector was published and released back in 2019. Since then, we have, of course, kept on working and have other publications that specifically talk about different technologies or different aspects of renewable energy. But also since then, a lot has changed, not only in terms of cost, of installed capacity, even in the number of jobs. But the question here today is how these past 5 years, 6 years have shaped the role of women and our contributions to the renewable energy sector. Today, then, we have a quick presentation followed by a panel to discuss these new findings. Let's start with the overall picture first. We can see that in the broader economy, women make up to half of the population, but yet still fall short into representing the workforce. And the energy sector, unfortunately, it falls even shorter and lags behind, especially in the traditional energy sector, with the conventional energy industries such as oil and gas or coal having a share below 25%. Renewable energy performs better somewhat, but is not doing that well either. In this new report, we have again estimated the number of women and the share of women in the workforce, and it still remains at the same level of 32%, which is a modest improvement over the conventional energy sector, but again, far away from parity. This underrepresentation means that half of the available talent and creativity is not fully contributing to the transition we need. But we need to remember that gender inclusion is not only a matter of fairness, it's also essential for innovation and productivity. As we can see, the report again also confirms what previous analysis show, which is mirroring the situation in the overall economy. Women representation in renewable energy is uneven across the different job categories and the different role that women have. In this case, we can see that representation of women is highly concentrated in administrative roles, with a little bit, with a very low representation in STEM technical positions, and as well in certification that are such as trade jobs in installations or construction. Non-STEM technical, which we define as positions such as lawyers or policymakers, etc., is a little bit higher, but still, again, lower than administrative positions. In this sense, leadership is where the gap widens. Women hold only about 19% of senior management positions in the renewable energy sector, compared to roughly 35% across the global economy, which is still low. Middle management is slightly better, around 26%, but senior roles remain highly male-dominated. This imbalance limits not only the representation, but also the decision-making power, influencing what technologies get developed, how they get developed, what policies and how are these policies shaped, and of course, also what projects receive funding or what work and who gets to work in the sector and who doesn't. Likewise, the representation also varies depending on the type of organization. Our analysis show that non-profit and civil society groups are better represented by women than other positions. In public institutions, the share is around mid-30% range, while in the private sector or profit sector drops about 1/4. This pattern suggests that organizational structure and culture and mission orientation may have a real impact on inclusion. Likewise, it's not a surprise, but aligned with previous findings, when we look at the renewable value chain from research and development to manufacturing, installation, and sales, we can see that women are most visible in administrative, communications, and policy functions, which let's not confuse with policy making. And their participation declines as activities become more technical or field-based. Addressing this imbalance means targeting intervention for these high-skill, high-growth segments, especially in engineering, project design, and operation, and trades, as we saw before. These gaps are not confined to a few regions or countries. They actually, according to our study, show that is an issue almost everywhere. Even in economies with strong gender equality policies, the renewable energy sector still reflects historical male dominance in STEM and energy fields. In developing countries, additional barriers may arise, like lack of childcare, mobility restrictions, or unequal access to finance, making it even harder to participate. So the challenge is global, but however, the solutions must be locally tailored. Likewise, it is very important to know how many women work in the sector and what roles do we have, but it's also very important to know what is these challenges and the barriers that are preventing women to participate. Not only in the different barriers that we have been splitting across the different sectors, the different publications that we have been doing in workplace barriers, societal constraints, or if there's any skills and education barriers, but also across the stages. If the entry is limited, there's a smaller pipeline for women to continue in the workforce. If the retention is weak, progress will stall. And without advancement, leadership diversity never will materialize. So let's explore all these layers. Workplace barriers that were the most informative or the most rank in within the barriers that the respondents of our survey presenting. Again, this issue is for entry, for retention, for advancement. In entry, of course, if recruitment relies on male-dominated networks and jobs adverts may unconsciously use language that deters female from applying, the representation will be lower. In retention, if rigid schedules, lack of parental support, and workplace cultures are there undervaluing the flexibility and undervaluing women's contributions, women will not remain and will not be encouraged to remain in the workforce. Promotion and pay systems can be biased. Leadership pipelines rarely include mentorship of sponsorship for women, and we can see how very highly has been ranking glass ceiling as an issue in this set of barriers. Likewise, societal constraints still prevent women from participating in entry and advancing in the sector. It is clear that the stereotyped gender roles, the lack of role models, and discrimination of bias and cultural expectations are still playing a major role in all stages. And last but not least, while being the least dominant barrier highlighted by women, fewer girls are entering STEM pathways early on, and that obviously materializes in lower participation of women in these categories. The absence of mentorship, the limited network opportunities, or the limited encouragement for training and mentorship and networking are playing, again, a vital role, especially at the leadership level, where the absence of leadership-specific training is also making women not progress adequately. In terms of pay gaps, the pay gaps still persist even within the renewable sector. While it's important to differentiate the difference due to the legitimate reasons, if a role has more duties or more experience, this is still driven by the cultural and bias against women that we have mentioned before, which will perpetuate the lack of women in those positions or those duties that require more pay. But also, we can see how the analysis show that the difference in negotiating skills and the lack of common pay scale policy is still ranking very high in the reasons why gender pay is different. So we urge for transparency through pay audits and disclosure requirements to close this gap. Women in the access context is also something that, of course, the report mentioned. It is important to clarify that, of course, as the survey that we were conducting was online, there's a huge sector of huge share of the population that work in renewable energy that may be limited and may not be as represented. But of course, we don't forget the importance of off-grid and rural energy projects, where women may have been seen more as only end users or beneficiaries, like in the case of lighting or cook stoves, etc., but where women can and should be central actors, as technicians, as entrepreneurs, as community energy leaders. This report emphasized the need to move beyond viewing women merely as beneficiary and instead empowering them as agents of change. Agency is crucial. So it's not just empowering, it's women need to retain this agency, especially, again, rural and indigenous women, to shape and benefit from renewable energy projects. And this will also strengthen both community and energy outcomes. Indigenous women and rural women bring valuable knowledge, local knowledge that can improve project design and a lot of the outcomes of renewable energy implementation in these regions. Participatory action research will help identify local needs and maximize socioeconomic benefits. If women co-design these projects, the results is better, the technology gets better adaptation, improve the maintenance, and the community gets a stronger sense of ownership. So empowering women in this way accelerates not only the energy access, but also gender equality. And in this sense, IRENA, we have been working, thanks to a very generous contribution of the government of Denmark, in a project that aims to precisely become indigenous or ensure that indigenous women in communities do have this agency and ownership over the projects. A key insight of this work is exactly that women cannot be just tokens of the mechanism of the renewable energy projects, but need to become very participant. For such, we have created a woman-centric toolkit that is aiming to integrate a socio-emotional learning mechanism. So it's not just to deploy the renewable energy in these areas, but to have self-reflection, peer-to-peer learning, collective advocacy, role modeling. And we do this through a simulative-based learning game that I'm very happy to be sharing some insights today, and will be very soon available in our website for any practitioner, any agency, or any community to use these resources for better understanding of renewable energy technology, and more importantly, to better involve women in these particularly indigenous communities to participate. This report, this work, as I mentioned, it's been done thanks to a generous contribution of the government of Denmark and through YAMOC and HPNet with a pilot community in Mindanao in Philippines. So stay tuned for more information on it. With this in mind, the report also, and to conclude, highlights the different and the key measures and the roles of the different actors that need to play a role in the energy transition. This approach cannot be top-down from the governments or bottom-up from grassroots initiatives and practitioners. It has to be cross-cutting, and it has to be integrated across the whole layers and all the levels of the different players in the energy transition: government, employers, intergovernmental organizations, developing banks, industrial employers, unions, grassroots initiatives, civil society organizations, women associations, governments, etc., educational institutions, unions. I don't know if I have mentioned it already, because together, it's only together if these actions will actually start making a difference. This also includes society at large. So us as individuals, of course, have a role. Men need to be part of these conversations. Men as allies can also support this. And with further ado, I'll just conclude this as my final slide, not only as a presentation of IRENA, but in my capacity and in my role as IRENA, with leaving the legacy of the gender perspective publications, that they are all available at irena.org publications. And I welcome you very much to read the reports and not only focus on the few highlights that I have managed to present today. With this, I leave the floor and the screen to Ute Collier, Acting Director of the Knowledge Policy and Finance Center, to have an amazing panel to discuss more about the policies and what can we do and the different roles for the gender transition. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Celia, and fantastic report, and of course, a brilliant presentation. So much in there, so rich. And I think all of us, we probably agree when we look at those figures, it kind of resonates very much. It's something we experience, I guess, almost daily, whether we're at conferences and find ourselves, well, either listening to manuals or being the token woman on a panel. Also, when we try and organize, do our best to try and get a nice diverse panel, and it can be so difficult. Or you look at things like the family photo of energy ministers at the IRENA assembly. It just seems to be moving so slowly. I mean, I remember getting frustrated about this early in my energy career, which is a few decades ago. And sometimes now I think, of course, we have moved on. And I think, the fact that I've got an excellent panel here of women who work in different on different aspects of renewables is of course progress, but there is a lot more to do, and that's what we want to discuss now. So I've got with me Christina Linz, who's the co-founder of GWNet, Michelle Ramirez from Mexico's NDC 3.0 update process, UNDP, Sonny Bellwoods from the Asian Development Bank, Dipti Vaghela from HPNet, and Jane Nakusumu from Kafui Gorge, and also part of IRENA Youth. Always great to see IRENA Youth delegates. So what we're going to do, we have a load of questions to our panelists, but we also want to make sure there is a bit of audience participation. So as ever, we have the Q&A facility. So please, if you have any questions, put it into Q&A, not chat. And then I will keep an eye on it, but I'll also invite the panelists. If there's an obvious question that's aimed at them, please just feel free to type the answer. If it's sort of a question that's maybe for all of you, then I might throw it open. So we'll start with round one, and then let's see where we are on the question front. Sorry, I just realized we have one panelist missing, but she will hopefully join us in a moment. So we'll start with Michelle. So Michelle, as countries update and implement their NDCs, what practical steps can be taken to mainstream gender equality into renewable energy commitments? Not just as a cross-cutting issue, but as a measurable driver of ambition and impact. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ute, and thank you, Celia, for this amazing presentation. And congratulations to IRENA for this outstanding new edition of the renewable energy perspective. And I think, just want to say very quickly, this report is a milestone. I think it reminds us that energy transition is not just about technologies, megawatts, investments, as we love to talk so often. It's about people. And I think sometimes our voices as women have been missing from those conversations. So I just want very quickly to congratulate the entire IRENA team for translating this so complex topic into something that we can have very practical, very measurable, and not just as a moral imperative, but a condition to a faster, fairer, and more effective transition. So thank you so much. And that being said, thank you for your question. In terms of mainstreaming gender in NDCs and renewable energy commitments, I think as we move and update all these NDCs, we have this opportunity to embed gender equality, not just as a cross-cutting reference, but as a measurable driver for ambition and to have more impact. And in the case of Mexico, through this NDC 3.0 process update, we are doing exactly that. This has been a broad participatory process that involves government, institutions, academia, and civil society, and also the private sector. So the idea behind this is to make an NDC that is just not just this policy document, but like a living instrument. We think and we feel that, and it reflects how Mexico is so inclusive, and it feels like this collective response to this global climate emergency. And as part of this effort, we are integrating gender equality in every stage of the development and every component of our NDC. In planning, financing, monitoring, we have it very inclusive NDC. And very practically, this means three things. It means policy design that is intentionally inclusive. Each mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage measure includes including renewable energy, is being reviewed and identify how we can reduce not only emissions but inequalities. We have renewable energy programs now expected to consider women access in terms of training. We want women to be involved in technology and participation in decision makings. And also, number two, we want gender responsive budgeting and finance. We are working to ensure that climate and energy investments create opportunities for women, whether through entrepreneurship or local energy cooperatives and technical training. And we think that financing the transition must also mean financing equality. And finally, number three, and this is where this new analysis from IRENA is very, very important. That data and accountability. We want these gender indicators developed to measure real progress. And the share of women in renewable energy employment, in leadership positions, and in access to clean energy services. These indicators are essential to link climate targets with social outcomes and making our NDC truly inclusive. So IRENA's report comes at the perfect time for us. It shows that globally, as Celia mentioned, women are making only 32% of renewable energy workforce, and it's better than for fuels, but still far from parity, as Celia mentioned. So it reinforces the need of data, transparency, and not only to understand the gaps, but also to help them close them. And finally, we want every ton of CO2 reduced to represent not only this environmental ambition, but also social justice.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And of course, the availability of data is very much something we would support because, as you can imagine, getting the data for this report has been difficult. And if we had more data collection, but ideally by all countries, it would be easy to put a report like this together. And my statistics colleagues would love you all. All right. You already mentioned financing, so this is a good time to come to Sonibel. What financing models or policy have successfully integrated a gender lens into renewable energy investments? And specifically, how can institutions like the Asian Development Bank scale these approaches?
Yes, thank you. Like others, I just want to add my voice, first of all, to thank IRENA for this report. The previous report has always been kind of our sort of guidance and our incredible resource when advocating for gender equality and gender mainstreaming in renewable energy. And so it's been such a great tool and a contribution to all of our work. So I just really want to thank you for doing this for all of our benefits. So, and now to turn to your question, I think, in terms of the financing models and policies that integrate a gender lens, we need to look at what's working, what are some of the things that are working, and what are some of the things that we should be doubling down on. So with ADB in our energy sector projects, many of them have gender action plans. This is really quite important because of the scale that ADB sometimes works at in terms of really large scale blended finance projects. And so we're always requiring our projects to have gender analysis, to set up targets, training, to collect sex disaggregated data, and the monitoring and evaluation of our projects. We've seen this operationalized through many different projects. One example is ADB's Pacific Islands Renewable Energy Investment Program. Another one is in Mongolia. We're working on a solar program. And these programs have, gender action plans that holds those that are implementing the projects accountable for ensuring that there's also intentional and direct gender benefits as well as indirect gender benefits. So I think scaling up and refining and increasing our ambition around what is included in gender action plans is really something that we need to double down on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we did a review a few years ago of how gender was being integrated, equality was being integrated into national energy policies. And I think there's a huge gap there. Most energy policies that we looked at in our region do not have, sometimes mention women as beneficiaries, but don't necessarily have any sort of dedicated sort of strategies on how to integrate women. So I think, we need to sort of work more on in following examples of, for example, Nepal, which has the and national energy company has dedicated gender and social inclusion actually function that mainstreams gender across off-grid, mini grids, biogas, and solar programs. And so they really are showing how a public agency can really bake in gender at a policy and implementation levels. We've also been using policy-based loans. That's a modality, and to encourage sort of greater integration of gender into energy projects, and also technical assistance to help energy ministries and regulators adopt gender screening tools or require sex disaggregated data reporting and so on. And then finally, I think we, as was also highlighted earlier, that we have to also focus on how do we provide finance to women-led energy MSMEs. This is still, early stages in many countries, but of course it's promising. And we need to find more truly scalable, gender inclusive financing models, particularly for women-owned MSMEs. This is a gap that exists, and maybe, that we should all be looking at. How do we structure, credit lines and risk sharing facilities for local financial institutions? How do we look at the collateral demands for women borrowers? And how do we provide technical assistance, grants, working with working capital loans, or for women-led MSMEs? So these are things that I think we could be doing more of. And then finally, I would say, that we need to continue to look at the big picture. And that includes, as Celia has mentioned, that part of the big picture is STEM education and really focusing on STEM leadership. So we have to look at how we are pairing and providing women with new skilling. Things, I'm so glad that you mentioned that childcare was mentioned, that safety, transport, so that we can facilitate women's sort of working in this sector. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. In fact, the points you were making about MSMEs brings me to Jane, because Jane, we wanted to talk with you about women and especially young women entrepreneurs who, of course, struggle. I mean, finance is one of the key barriers for them wanting to enter the renewable energy sector, but there are also other challenges. So if you could tell us a bit more about the challenges young women in particular face and what kind of opportunities can be provided that make the biggest difference to allow them and encourage them to become renewable energy entrepreneurs?
Thank you so much for that question, and so glad to be on this panel. As mentioned in the introduction, I am an alumni of IRENA Youth Forum, and it's really great to be here to share my experiences. I would love to agree with Zonibel Woods in the sense that already it starts from the early stages, from education, from primary education, that you already see the disparities from there, because you find that especially in developing countries, young girls are firstly not accessing education. Let's start from there. They're not able to go to school. And why aren't they going to school, the ones in the rural areas? Because they're busy collecting firewood, because they're taking care of their siblings. So they're being left behind from such an early stage to a point that by the time they're catching up, they're able to catch up with their counterparts, and maybe they're starting their businesses and their enterprises. They're lacking some of the skills that their counterparts already got from the early stage, from the STEM educations, the skills that they need for them to be able to successfully run their businesses. So one of the biggest challenges definitely is the skills. I believe that having seen some of the numbers that we receive at Kafrego Regional Training Center in terms of training, the numbers of women are very low and quite alarming, because if you're looking at the skill gap, it's really large. We also have the issue of markets. When it comes to them wanting to scale their businesses beyond just serving their communities, whether it's in solar or whatever energy enterprise that they're having, they fail to scale to access larger markets. And this is because there are so many restrictions for them to be able to access larger projects. They need to have built a company that has done a number of projects. They need to have built the capacity within their institution. And those challenges make them stuck at a certain level. So I really love how Zonabel Woods highlighted that there is need for that financial support to enable them to have that capacity to be able to grow, maybe with more equipment, with a bigger team, with more expertise. So they need the financing to be able to do that. They need the skills to be able to do that. They also need trust. It's also an issue of trust. I believe that whenever there's a project and there's a panel that is assessing this project, let us try and see how many women are actually on that panel assessing these projects. And how are they going to favor? Will they favor the female-led enterprise? Will they favor the other enterprises? So those are some of the challenges that are there. And to just quickly respond to your second question, I think it's even more difficult if you're in the youth group, because you have less years having worked in the industry as compared to other women. For example, maybe other women have been in the industry for 20 years, they've worked for different companies, and you're a young woman running an enterprise and maybe you only have 3 years of experience. So what do you bring to the table? So there's that as well. And it disqualifies them from that extent. Reading the report, there's one thing that the report highlighted as well. It spoke about negotiation skills. Unfortunately, you find that women lack the skills to properly negotiate, because it's also an issue of self, confidence, because they don't feel confident enough to ask for more money, to demand to be paid for their services, for instance, and then they find themselves just scrambling for, crumbs in these projects. So that's my input. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jane. Yes, of course, women are notoriously bad at negotiating for their salaries, apparently, too. I mean, that's not an energy sector specific thing, but I know you always read about this, and that, obviously contributes to the pay gap you find between women and men. I think we need to get better. I mean, of course, I love all my male colleagues, but just occasionally you come across people, and the confidence, even young, inexperienced men sometimes have such confidence, whereas you go, oh my God, I would never be so demanding. Of course, they're not all like that, but I have found that quite striking sometimes. And I suppose that also happens in the scenarios you're talking about, Jane, when it's about young entrepreneurs. Interesting, don't you think, in energy access I've come across quite a lot of young, pushy men, often even Americans and whatever. And I mean, they do have great ideas, but I'm sure a lot of young women do as well. Is that what you've seen too?
Most definitely. I think what's beautiful about the renewable energy sector is
Oops, I think we lost Jane there, unfortunately. Okay, hopefully she will be back in a moment. She's just frozen. Let's move on to Dipti. I mean, Dipti, you work on small hydropower, and often we're dealing with people in remote communities, right? So talking about decentralized energy then, sorry, from your talking about hydropower, small hydropower, what roles do you see women playing there generally, especially in remote communities and amongst indigenous people? What support is needed to ensure that they can go into leadership and decision making?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel. So I work with a network of practitioners in Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America on community scale hydropower. So we're talking about projects that are below 1 megawatt, and they are managed and owned by the communities. And we have seen over the last 12 years of the network being formed, and also the sectors that have existed for 30, 40 years, and members have been leading that approach, is that women play a huge role in unifying the community. So small-scale hydropower, unlike household-based systems, is an entire community-owned decentralized energy solution. And so you really need everyone involved. And we're also dealing with common pool resources, so water and land, that are shared by the community. So if there is a few households that are not wanting to take part, that consensus really has to be built on why is it that they don't want to take part? Are there some things to change? And even from my own experiences on the field, I realized it was the women who really brought the community together. My projects were in one part of India, and that women didn't have an externally seen leadership role. So I gave them space behind the scenes, and I realized as soon as we took women from one village to see the project in another, the next week the men had already been convinced to come together and move forward on next steps. So and this is especially important for indigenous communities, because indigenous women in their cultures have an innate role connected with their land and water resources. And so when we do the different phases of the project, in implementation, productive end use, and also climate adaptation, the indigenous women have a wealth of knowledge just from their own lives of being out in the forest, making life happen there. They know how the water flows during different seasons. They know which vegetation on the hills provide good resistance to erosion during heavy rains. And so it's really critical to involve them in the process. And we have seen that often, because the project timelines are so tight with the funding, projects have to be completed in a certain amount of time, the process of involving women kind of becomes very superficial and token. So women, sure, they attend the meeting, but if they have not gone through this process before, they are shy, They kind of want to understand what's going on. That takes time for the facilitating organization to help them come up to speed on. We've also seen in some communities, especially Indigenous communities, where they've been marginalized so much due to extractive industries, that the community is no longer unified. And so our members have been working on first to build each of their individual self-esteem. And when that happens, the women naturally start to trust each other. And then they form coalition. Usually it's informal. And then within a couple of years, it becomes a formal association or a cooperative. And that's completely transformative in terms of decentralized renewable energy, because then they are a legal entity. And when they go on to productive end use, anything else related to the project, they can actually apply for financing. They can go to their local government, ask for certain policies. And so thanks to IRENA, we're actually soon going to release practitioner best practices, giving examples of how this has happened in certain contexts.
Thank you, Dipti, and I look forward to seeing that. You mentioned token women, token participation. I think we've all come across this. It's a tricky thing. You really have to be careful. I mean, on the one hand, of course, we sometimes struggle to get the involvement of women, and then easily someone could point at saying, "Oh, this is just a token participation." When you've worked really hard to get that involvement. I mean, you know, when you've tried to get 5 women on as speakers, and in the end you end up with 1. So I think it's a tricky issue. We need to all, I don't know, I feel it's easy to criticize, so we need to understand exactly what's going on. But let me come to Christine. GWNet has been really active in this area of getting greater involvement of women in energy transition. You've got a number of different programs aimed at younger women, at women in clean cooking, at senior women. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you support women in advancing their careers, maybe also specifically how to deal with this tokenism issue and how to get around it, please?
Thank you. Again, a big congratulations to the entire IRENA team and Celia particularly for yet a stunning report. Before I just get to your question, you know, when I saw the first reactions first last week when it came out, I thought, okay, 32%. Somebody said not much has happened. And then over the weekend, I read through the report and then I reflected a little bit about it. And I think, you know, we must not forget that between the last report in 2019 and now we had a pandemic. And the pandemic had an impact on women's participation because, I mean, we saw it in many surveys and studies, the impact on women having to do more care duties and being much more even impacted with all these shutdowns and lockdowns and you name it, is not negligible. And when you look at the OECD figure for economy-wide women participation that you share in the report, it was higher in last year's report than in the one you use now. So to a certain extent, what I'm just saying, yes, we all agree it doesn't advance quickly enough, but we also must acknowledge that between the last one and this one, there was quite a major thing happening. One of the things that struck me most, I have to say, is this graph that you show on share of women by different types of organization, where we see that the public sector doesn't do so bad, but where the private sector is really on the bottom of the graph with just 25%. And I think we have started to work with the private sector. We had, for example, a big program on women in wind, one of our oldest programs, where we had 7 editions working with the wind industry. But we have not yet done so much with the private sector. And I think this is really what I take as a lesson for me from the IRENA report, where I say, okay, we have to scale up commitment and work with companies. Because what I often hear is that slowly they understand that gender equality also means economic benefits, but they often don't know really how to do it. And I think we have to tackle this and really also hold the the private sector more accountable, and this has to happen with I think mandatory quotas and targets, because if it's just voluntary engagement, it's just taking us too long to make that happen. What are we doing? I mean, of course, it's important to work on data, as you do in your reports. We have worked on behalf of the World Bank recently on a report about women in hydropower, which is available from our website. It has very similar statistics than you have there. We work a lot in the framework of mentoring, because we have identified that mentoring is a powerful tool. And in your analysis, it's also shown that that women often lack mentoring and networking opportunities. So we had over the last couple of years more than 25 programs with 945 mentees from, I don't know, I think 90 countries in the world. So quite international. And we do also combine mentoring components with training opportunities and with networking, because we often hear from our participants that what they also lack is global networks. And in that sense, we really combine the bilateral one-to-one relationship with providing networking opportunities, be it in the sector, be it in energy storage or in clean cooking or in wind, where these programs are centered, or even more broadly. We have also started with an initiative in the SADC region, so in the southern part of Africa, about attracting new talent to the sector. So we have so far worked a lot on women that already work in this space, and now we also want to focus on attracting new talent to the sector. So we're currently working on a social media campaign to attract young women and girls and provide them with role models and ideas and share opportunities, how great this sector is. And in general, we work in partnership with many organizations, be it regional, national, women in energy networks. Michelle, we met during MaxiRec, but I think I've lost a bit track of you, and we have not yet worked with Wing. So I'm also taking this up and invite you also to to join our network. And I'm also going to put Deepti in touch with the Women in Sustainable Hydropower Network, because I think you would also bring excellent experience there. So I think we really have to even more strongly continue to connect the dots and work together on making this happen, so that for the next IRENA report, we have a higher number. We aim at 40% instead of the 32%.
Sounds good. Thanks, Christina. You mentioned the need for quotas, and a voluntary approach might not work particularly well. We also, I can't remember who said it, one of you said something about the important role of the public sector and public sector programs. I'd like to just pick one of the questions here, actually, because the reality is, while in some countries, maybe like Mexico, as you said, Michelle, there was a very strong focus on inclusiveness. Not all governments in the world are supportive and can be gender biased. We also have this unfortunate situation, as we all know, that some countries are going back on their inclusiveness programs. So where do we go from here? What is possible in those countries? Anyone got any thoughts on it? I think some of you will be working with countries where this approach is not so easily accepted. Sonibel, please go ahead.
I wasn't going to really talk about where it's not accepted, but I just wanted to support what Christine said earlier, which was, that we need to bring in quotas. And, this can be done in terms of the private sector. It can also be done we do it through our ADB projects. In our gender action plans, we look at the baseline of sort of how many women are participating in the utility that we're, financing, or the program. And we look at setting up a target for women being hired in technical roles, not necessarily just in any role, but in technical roles. We look at internship programs that benefit women. So I think we have to continue to take this incremental role, and just because, in some cases, there might be some discomfort in terms of, having quotas. The reality is that we have to use this argument that at the end of the day, we do the need for workers in renewable energy is higher than what we can realistically provide. And so without women, we will not be moving fast enough for what we need to do together in terms of advancing renewable energy. So I think having incremental targets, maybe we don't call them quotas, we call them, incremental targets. Um, and maybe that's the way to go. But alongside of that, I think we can't just have targets or quotas. We have to have policies that go along with it, and making the workplace is friendly for women. So making sure that we have anti-harassment policies, that we maybe provide childcare, that we have family-friendly policies. And so looking at the whole ecosystem that facilitates women for entering the sector, as others have rightly pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to come in on this one? Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Jutta, for this pointing this out, because I think it's important. There's always challenges when talking about these topics. So I will say that there is still ways to move forward, and I will say maybe just start more locally, like maybe working with communities or universities or private actors who are open to this conversation and to talk about inclusion. And these small examples maybe can create good practices. And I will say again, this is why this analysis is so important, because you need always to show data and evidence, because when we show that a gender inclusion like actually improves results in terms of project performance or social impact, it, it is a topic that becomes more harder to ignore. That's what I will say. And also networks matter. Having this conversation matter. It creates an impact. And I would say maybe not to be scared to talk about these kind of topics. Like, it is important. We now have more data, updated data, and we can talk easier with all these things at hand. It will help to have this conversation.
Thank you, Michelle. Christine?
Well, while I don't have the answer, and obviously in many parts of the world it is frustrating what is happening, and because we see a backlash on the importance of diversity and women empowerment. What I've heard from colleagues, colleagues in the US, I think that's the big elephant in the room we are speaking of at the moment. They don't talk anymore about diversity, but they talk about work pipeline development. I think to some extent we need to rephrase some of those efforts. And as Sonibel has said, we don't have enough skilled workforce, and not having people who can work in the sector and make an industry flourish will we have a bad impact on the sector. So I think we need to address it from this. And then I realized I didn't answer your question about tokenism before. I think you can also feel it, whether there's a woman was placed on a panel just for the sake of having a woman there. I just recall, and now Michelle, so Mexirec, this conference in Mexico that we co-organized when I was at REN 21 in, I think it was in 2017. You know, when we had the first list of speakers, we were shocked because we had hardly any female speakers. We ended up with, at the end of the day, I think 36%, which I understand for Mexican standards was quite good, but you generally and really need to put an effort into finding people there out there. And this also is one of the things women are often, they do equally good work or even better work, but they less talk about it. And so it's sometimes a bit more difficult to find them. I have also heard as a suggestion from women when they're invited on a panel and they see that they are the only one, they suggest another colleague, another woman who could also join the panel. So you could also proactively help to make sure that you don't end up being the only one. So there are small strategies, but overall, it's really, and that's why I think it's important that women are involved in decision-making positions, because when women are involved in design of conferences, in recruitment processes, they're more focused, or they have this gender balance more on their minds as men. I would say they're more sensitive to this issue, and therefore can help to make the situation a bit more gender balanced, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think all of us who sit on panels, we tend to want the women to do well. I mean, you've got to be fair, absolutely. And I mean, I've certainly ended up with unfortunately all male shortlists in the end, because even if you look out for these things we as women tend to do, like undersell ourselves, I mean, sometimes you just don't have the right candidates. And then in the end, if your right candidates are the men, that's fine. And in the end, well, in the cases I've been on, it's not been so tragic, because we do have a more balanced team generally anyway. But yeah, I think it's all our responsibility to look out for these things. I mean, there are some very good networks as well. I'm aware of women in hydrogen, but Michelle, I think you're involved in women in geothermal, right? Is this another network which also helps find speakers, etc.? What does it do?
Well, yes, like WING was created to change all this that we are talking about. Our mission is to promote balance, enhance visibility and leadership for women across the geothermal value chain. And particularly, maybe I can very briefly speak about what we are doing in Latin America, because we are working in different fronts. For instance, in terms of empowerment and growing opportunities for women and young women in the region, we launched this scholarship program, offering financial support for women professionals to attend the first Latin American Congress for geothermal, which took place last month in El Salvador. We provided a scholarship of $1,000 to cover travel and registration, accommodation. But what we think it's more important, that we think that this kind of scholarship will be open doors. First, for women to present at the Congress, because we tend to be like small number, to be honest, and also to strengthen their professional networks and gain visibility in this field where we've long been underrepresented. Another thing we do is we do kind of mentorship and community programs across the region and even globally, where we are building bridges between early career and senior professionals, fostering mentoring and relationship and peer support. I will say that's what I like the most about working in geothermal energy. All these networks that women have and how it makes everything easier, and I will say make me work more happily in a single day, where it's, so demanding industry. And we also work on advocacy and partnerships. We collaborate with governments and development banks, industry actors to promote gender balance. And the idea is to make diversity a core part of project design and exploration and management and financing, and show that diversity is not about just being nice, and fairness is about performance and innovation, and that we are bringing results.
Great. Yes, of course, diversity is not just about being nice. I mean, different types of people bring in different ideas as well. And I mean, certainly some of the women I've met at conferences in Women in Hydrogen, they were really good, young engineers and know what they're doing. And it's great that, I mean, these are two particularly male-dominated areas, I think, hydrogen and geothermal at the moment. So it's great that there are these networks. Just talking a bit more about young people in renewables. Jane, we had someone contributing here from Tanzania actually saying, that the beneficiary of, well, young women this is an energy efficiency program specifically, and she thinks more opportunities must be provided worldwide, like internship, fellowship, scholarships to inspire women. But of course, that will always be a limited amount. How important do you think that is? Or do you see any other programs that really can inspire people, which are maybe not quite so demanding in terms of financing and donors?
Thank you so much for that one. I definitely agree that the internship one is a good opportunity. I previously mentioned about experience. That's very, very important. And with internships, at least they're able to gain that experience in the sector. Regarding programs, one of the main things that I have personally appreciated is mentorship. I think that one is not as demanding. It doesn't need so much resources. Someone basically just needs to be willing to offer their time to help someone build their business, build their idea. And also networks. I believe that Kristen highlighted this, and I totally agree with that, because with networks, you're able to firstly access potential customers, clients, and it's a direct approach. You don't necessarily need external resources. You really just need to be able to sell your idea, to sell your business, and from there grow organically. So I would definitely love to see more B2C kind of approaches, market linkages, where they're able to link enterprises, SMEs with markets that are ready and willing to accept their solutions. I've seen this in the case of, for instance, the Women's Entrepreneurship Access Center here in Zambia has done that by creating opportunities for women-led enterprises to showcase their businesses to potential clients who come on board, and from there actually get to be able to sell their products, sell their services. So that then enables the enterprises to scale. There you go from, just having 5, 6 customers to reaching larger markets. And personally, I think I've benefited from that as well. I also love the approach that you've been taking with IRENA. From the policy perspective, from the leadership perspective, that's very important as well, to be able to learn about your policy landscape. I feel that having an understanding of your policy landscape can help you position your business better. You know what exactly is available for you in your government. You know how to negotiate. We spoke about negotiation earlier. So that is also very, very important, to be able to speak to policymakers, to decision makers, and sell yourself in that space.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Let's take another question here from Alicia de la Cruz. This is going back to what we talked about earlier on, that not all the barriers are energy sector specific. It's more from, well, she calls it internalized perception, but things like women tending to be less assertive. So how do we address these internal barriers? Has anyone got any experience from programs they've been involved in? Christine, but also Dipti, I quite like you to come in on this one as well. Dipti, do you want to go first? And then Christine.
Sure. Yeah, actually, with IRENA's support in this recent project, so going back to that token and transformative participation, the difference between that, we went to practitioners who have closely worked with Indigenous women to identify what it looks like to go through token versus transformative through three different value chains: implementation, productive end use, and adaptation. And once we realized the difference of what it looks like, the biggest the factor, the tipping point or inflection point is how women feel about themselves. And so we realized that curriculum has to be very place-based, because even if you're in one country, one sub-region, even if it's Indigenous, the persons that we interviewed say that even within one Indigenous community, each household has different perceptions, different extent of what kind of agency women have in that family or household. And so we realize the need to have place-based capacity building. And in our sector, because most of the rural Indigenous women are not formally educated, implementing a small-scale hydropower project is really coming from formalized engineering. So how do you bridge that gap? So we realized visual-based learning, learning that has storytelling involved, narrative, where women really can come out with what they've experienced. So the number one lesson is that we need to work with the rural Indigenous women who have already gone through this process of becoming empowered, and co-create with them the capacity building curriculum for the next set of women that a practitioner would work with. So yeah, these are some of the lessons coming out.
Thank you. Christine?
While I do agree with Dipti that it is often context specific, we have, interesting enough, often got the feedback from our mentoring programs, which are more global in nature, because we have, for example, a program for women in energy storage, where it's people from 20 different countries, that they, and again, I mean, we're not addressing the same sectors, so these are most of the times highly educated women, and they often find it eye-opening that they see that the barriers women face are pretty similar across different cultures. They might be differently nuanced, but in general, this imposter syndrome or all these things are similar in different cultures. And we have just seen that through mentorship, we often get the feedback that people gain confidence, women gain confidence by being encouraged to take the next step, and mentoring has really is seen by many as a key success factor. And the positive effect of participating in these programs is also the gaining of a network of connections, which they can then cultivate even beyond the end of the program. Which for me personally, this networking aspect was something that I totally underestimated, but it's always brought up by participants that this is equally important to them, to gain new networks, which they can then cultivate over time. And I think this is also something which is really important, that networks need to be cultivated, and it's not when you need them, but you just nourish these contacts over a longer period of time.
Sonny Bell, you wanted to come in as well?
Yeah, just very briefly, I wanted to challenge us a little bit in terms of, we've been talking about, women maybe not being assertive enough, or in sort of energy related spaces. But I think maybe if we could push it a little bit, sort of a bit more, to talk about sort of gender norms, because, you know, what we find is that in some cases, we may say that women are maybe not asserting themselves, but then in other cases, when women assert themselves, it's too much. So I think we have to be careful about sort of the narrative that we create around this issue, because the problem is not whether women are assertive enough or too assertive. I think it's the gender norms of, you know, what is expected for women to behave like. And so I think kind of changing and maybe reframing the discussion to say, you know, to talk about the importance of creating an enabling environment, you know, for inclusivity. And that includes sort of women in all of their different, you know, whether they're young women or older women, indigenous women, in sort of all of their diversity, and sort of going from there. Because I think otherwise we get stuck in this narrative that women are just not being assertive enough, and feels like we may be blaming the women a little bit, rather than saying, you know, we still have a lot of work to do on gender norms that prevent women from really shining through and advancing in this field.
It's probably a bit of a combination of both, isn't it? I mean, I think we also need to ask ourselves, you know, I think if we have the awareness of the things, of how we are perceived or what we're doing, sometimes we're just not even aware, like this continuous apologizing, or always referring to, oh, the team, the team, the team. Sometimes you did something yourself, and I think you should also maybe occasionally take credit, which I think we struggle more. But I don't know, it's difficult, isn't it? I'd like to just pick up one other question here, and this is about well, someone talks here about women over 35. I think we should actually think a bit more about slightly older than that, because as we've already talked about, what we need to achieve this energy transition, we need to have many more people to work in it, because we have massive skill shortages. And I think part of this will also, of course, have to be retraining. And I mean, there are many women, I think, especially if they've taken some time out, they might be rethinking time out because of family. They might be rethinking, well, what do I do next for the final 20 or so years of my career? Have you seen any sort of ways of addressing that, opportunities that can be offered specifically for women of maybe the older age group, rather than, I know we've talked about, you know, getting young women in and starting even at school, but we also need to think about encouraging part of the labor force who potentially got a lot to give. Jane. Jane, you got your hand up.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right, thank you so much. I love that question. It sort of ties into the other question you had asked me about, you know, are we seeing innovation? Are we seeing, you know, different skills coming up? For me, I see the energy sector as being very inclusive, in the sense that there's so many different innovative ways of doing it. And primarily for the role of mentorship, I believe that is something that the, you know, more experienced generation has the unique ability to provide that mentorship, that expertise. I personally have been benefited from this. I do have, you know, several mentors who are, some of them are retired, you know, they've worked in civil service, they've worked in government for so many years, and they have so much skills, so much wisdom that maybe I'm working on a proposal, I can reach out to them and then they can offer their support. And there are also instances where it's not just free support, but if it's a project that I need someone with skills on the team, I can reach out to them and say, are you able to offer this skill for this project over this period of time? And they're able to do that. So there's so much potential in this space to have participation. That's the contribution I wanted to give. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else on this one? Thinking more about the sort of bringing in women later on to maybe retrain and encourage them to go into parts of the energy transition workforce? Maybe there is a gap there. Maybe we're all too focused on people who are already working on energy and really attracting young women. Because I think there is plenty of scope there. I've also, I mean, I have come across women who are, well, in fact, through mentorship programs, but who are trying to break into the energy transition sector from the rest of the energy sector, oil and gas, for example, and they're actually struggling as well. I think it's not that straightforward. You tend to get kind of pigeonholed, right? You're an oil and gas person now. We don't want you in the sustainable energy sector, and you're a woman, so probably double tricky. Dipti.
Yeah, I wanted to share that in terms of what I call beneficiary women in decentralized renewable energy projects, it tends to be the older women who come forth as the transformative leaders. And it seems like the younger girls have more difficulty. They face more challenges in entering the sector, partly because there's a lot of expectation of them, whereas the older women, you know, have gone through those challenges, life challenges, and they're at a point where they are they already have roles established in the community. So just to clarify, yeah, this, as Christine had said earlier, so we're talking about women who are using the renewable energy versus women who are in the workforce. And I guess for decentralized projects, those women are both. They're both the consumers as well as the workforce in a way. So.
Okay, thank you. Now, I've got here one on Africa specifically, and well, Africa and other developing regions to be better supported to lead digital and renewable energy innovations, because I guess especially, I mean, Africa, we often talk about DRE and things like clean cooking entrepreneurs, but now we're moving into this age of, say, AI in renewables. Are there any programs that can specifically help? Any thoughts? No.
Well, I would like to share for our community scale hydropower sector. It's over the last 30 years, there's been a transition. When I entered the sector 30 years ago, there was a lot of focus on it, as well as biomass solutions that produce electricity. And then with the cost reduction of solar PV and batteries and LED systems, the rural energy sector really started focusing on PV. And so there's so many parts of sub-Saharan Africa that actually have vast untapped community scale hydro resources, countries that are less than 5% electrified, 10% electrified, even less in rural areas. And with small-scale hydropower, it's not just the electricity, but it's also the watershed. It incentivizes the community to maintain the watershed and therefore build climate resilience. And so, yeah, I think AI could be used. One of the challenges of doing small-scale hydropower is to find the ideal sites. And so if that technology could be interfaced with the various practitioners that look at mapping sites, finding hydro resources, head and flow, that could really speed up the process. And then financiers often don't want to fund one project at a time. They want to move big money. I mean, in the day when there were more development funds. But even so, if we're looking more at finance projects, we need to look at productive end uses that will generate income, social enterprise models. And even in that, AI could have a huge role in identifying the end uses. And then also, as I'm just like thinking aloud with this question, using AI to see which of those end uses have the most impact on women. yeah, that could be also very helpful.
Great. I've got Christine and Jane on this one as well. Christine?
Unmute myself. I think there are a lot of programs out there provided by various networks. I know of in Africa, we have ourselves in our program, we have a mentoring program for women in energy in the SADC region. I know of a program run by RMI at the Rocky Mountain Institute, covering some African countries. The Renewables for Africa Foundation is working on programs and has also some programs particularly focusing on women. So there's a lot out there. There are also a lot of networks out there. That there are these regional centers, the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Look into it. We would also be happy to provide some contacts to those various programs. And again, I think it's important that you find networks in which to engage, be it sectoral ones, be it national ones, be it regional ones, and by connecting with others, you'll find your way. But there is definitely a lot out there which can make an overview easier. And again, I think this really brings the importance of role models to the surface. And we hear this over and over that people, and that was actually one of the main motivations why I co-founded GWNet back in 2017, that there was no global network, and people often would come to me and say that they lack for role models in the sector. And I think, and this is also where a bit more senior people can really, play an important part to showcase what they've done, not out of promoting their ego, but just showing what is possible in this sector and what great opportunities are there. And with this chartering a bit the course for the younger generation.
In fact, you've kind of already contributed to what was going to be my final question, which was I was going to ask each of you to share one key action which will help address the situation, which is critical to ensure women thrive in the renewable energy sector. So can I take role models as your contribution, Christine? And let me move on to Jane. If you want to add something to that last question, but also if you can give me that key action you think is necessary.
Thank you so much. So regarding having AI included, I believe that there's so much opportunity. I'll give practical examples. At Kafue Regional Training Center, we also develop projects, and just to continue from what Deputy was mentioning, in some of these environmental impact and social assessments, there's a lot of knowledge with the indigenous communities, and that's something that AI can actually keep and store. I think there's a project that's been done here in Zambia, developing some apps that can actually translate local languages, because that's one of the challenges that project developers have. You go into a province, you go into a rural area, you can't speak the language. So there's so much potential there. And that's something that also Kafue Regional Training Center is offering, courses that enable people to use, big data and all these different other technologies to implement their energy projects. So I think the action that I would recommend is to just continue to build skills and capacities in women to ensure that they are, competitive, as we spoke about, so that they bring so much that they can't be ignored. Thank you.
Thanks. Michelle?
Well, I would say that the key will be to make gender equality something that is measurable, and part of the energy policy in general terms makes it clear targets, budgets, and indicators. That will be what I think it's really key. But adding to what Kirsten just mentioned, I just want to add that yes, we need to work on these role models, but also I will say that and be the role model you think you will need when you were younger, and make sure that you're visible, because what we do on a daily basis is important.
Thanks. Sonny Bell?
I think we have to start really, really early and invest in STEM education for girls as early as 12. By the time that girls reach 12 years old, they have already formed ideas about who they are, their capacities, the things that they will choose in the future, and so on. And unfortunately, some of the biases that go with why, girls may not go into STEM careers. So I think investing in STEM education for girls is key, and also working with parents so that they support the girls to go into STEM careers.
Absolutely. Thanks. And Dipti.
Yes, if every decentralized renewable energy project that's community-based, when the funding comes, if there could be a seed fund set aside to facilitate a collective women's group that forms into a formal association, facilitates that capacity building that really changes how they see themselves individually and as a collective, I think it could go a long ways in optimizing the socioeconomic benefits of the project.
Thank you, Dipti. And I thank you all for your contributions here. I think it was a very rich discussion, which I enjoyed very much. And I'd also like to thank the audience. We've had lots of questions. We've tried to answer some of them. Sorry if I haven't got to everyone, but we tried our best. And I'd like to hand back to Celia now. Thanks.
Thank you, Te. Thank you again to the audience, and thank you to the panelists. Some of you woke up very early, some of you are working after hours. I very much appreciate it. It was a very dynamic and very interesting conversation. I want to again remind everybody that the report is available online, so please go read the report. Don't only take the details of the highlights that we have presented. There's a lot of insights. And before concluding, I would like to reiterate what I said about everybody has a role. At society at large, all individuals can do something, and that all on our own will not succeed and will not move forward. And we have to remember that men can be allies. And on that note, I would like to give closing remarks, and I would like to, for leaders like Michael Renner, my line manager for the last very, very long time, to say a few words because I think he's a very good example of what a men ally should be, and how can through actions actually do something meaningful for the cause. So Michael, the floor or the screen is yours. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Celia. Much appreciated for the kind words. And I really want to express my gratitude to you for the great work you have done in making this report possible, from designing the survey to analyzing the responses that we got, to going on to the recommendations and really thinking about what does this mean in terms of how do we surmount the barriers that are clearly there. So it's a really nice culmination, I think, of your work on this really critical topic over the years. Equally much, I want to thank you, first of all, to Ute for the moderation. Very nice, as usual. And of course, many thanks to our panelists for your rich and really insightful remarks. I enjoyed listening enormously to you. I think I learned a lot in the process. And I think this webinar once more to me demonstrates that there is so much expertise and wisdom that we can and need to build on in moving toward greater gender equity, both in the energy transition, but I think also far beyond that as well. It's to me really quite sad and aggravating that the progress on gender equity in renewables has been much slower than I would have hoped, certainly. I am actually reminded of a lament that was made by a panelist when we first launched our gender perspective report back in 2019. That panelist said, "This is the 21st century. Why do we still need to talk about this?" Implying, of course, that far more progress should have already been achieved a long time ago. So needless, and I think you have all spoken to this, some progress clearly has been made, and I think we have definitely much greater awareness of the issues involved, and I think there's hope that we can really progress more. But I think also, and this has been said in this discussion, we all know that there is now a political backlash, not just in the US, I think, actually, but certainly there, against the efforts to achieve greater diversity, equity, and inclusion objectives. And I think, gender equity is, I think, sometimes or too often falsely portrayed as sort of setting the genders against each other. But this really has it backwards. The empowerment of women does not imply or signal the disempowerment of men. This is really not a zero-sum game at all. And I think, Celia, as you have been pointing out many times, men do need to be allies. Men need to be equally invested in a more balanced and a more equitable economy and society. Ultimately, we all benefit from such an outcome. And I think the energy transition will really not truly succeed without it. But so let me say a few more things. So apart from, I think, simple fairness considerations, it's quite clear that the renewable energy industry and sector needs the talent and the ingenuity of women. This is not only a matter of avoiding technical skills shortages that are already apparent in the sector, but I think it means more. It means bringing to bear women's perspectives on how to design and how to shape the energy transition. As you were saying, Celia, and all of you really, women are change agents, no question about that. They really are in many ways. But I think it needs to be reflected and translated more strongly, particularly in leadership positions in both the private and public sectors. And so in closing, let me just sort of reach back a little bit and say that IRENA's analysis for many years has highlighted the fact that the energy transition is really about more than technology, more than about costs, and more than about megawatts installed. These are clearly important metrics, but we need to pay close attention to who benefits, and that, I think, in turn depends on who gets to have a voice in the deliberations and really is part of the decision making. With that, I'm going to end my remarks and I'm going to close this webinar. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.